While most presidents wore suit jackets, ties, and dress pants all the time, you don't have to any longer. Because Presidents Unplugged has merch. If you want to check out some new shirts to buy as a nice gift for somebody in your family or just something that you want yourself, go to presidentsunpluggedmerch.com to check out new shirts, hoodies, crew necks, and anything else that you can dream of. Now in many more colors and new designs coming soon. I'm very excited for the President's Unplugged merch store to finally be open. Now, let's get back to the show. Imagine writing one of the most important documents in American history, winning the presidency not once, but twice, bringing mac and cheese to America. And your reputation is still tarnished to this day, almost 200 years later, because of some decisions you made and some things you said. How was Jefferson really defined by contradiction and controversy? Let's do this. Thomas Jefferson was born in 1743 in Virginia to a very wealthy family. His childhood was comfortable, he was privileged, and he was full of opportunity. And from a young age, Jefferson was known for one thing above everything else. He could write. Not just well, exceptionally well. As he grew older, teachers, scholars, and political leaders all noticed the same thing, that Jefferson had a gift for his elegant, persuasive writing. Little would he know that that gift would change the course of American history. At just 26 years old, Jefferson drafted most of the Declaration of Independence in only a few days. For a man who's barely older than many college graduates today, it was an extraordinary achievement. And although Benjamin Franklin and John Adams helped him fix up and polish the final draft, the revolutionary ideas at its core came from Jefferson. His ideas for the Declaration came from his own sense of justice that he had gained from his extensive studying, and even from Thomas Paine's widely read pamphlet called Common Sense. What was Common Sense? It's referenced a lot in history class, so let's get it straight. Thomas Paine, who originally didn't even write his name on the pamphlet to prove a point, Common Sense was a pamphlet that said, if Britain is not treating us right, why don't we have the right to make our own government and rebel? These ideas were controversial at the time because Britain had a bunch of power in the colonies. They were taxing them, putting on these acts, which all led to taxes in the end, and they were just being super unfair in what we know as taxation without representation. So Thomas Paine's ideas in his Common Sense pamphlet that we should be able to rebel, we should be able to make our own nation, were foundational in Jefferson's ideas in the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson's original draft of the Declaration included some bold statements that aren't on there today, including a harsh condemnation of the transatlantic slave trade, making a statement against slavery. Talk about contradiction? Wait till the end of this episode. I've got something pretty sad to tell you. Congress removed that section talking about the transatlantic slave trade, mostly because most of the Congress members had slaves themselves, and the omission says a lot about the world that Jefferson lived in, and those contradictions that would follow him for the rest of his life. During the Revolutionary War, Jefferson served as the governor of Virginia. Not very effectively, though. He struggled to lead during this war for independence, and many times he was actually frightened at what the British had the power to do. And in 1781, British troops actually approached Monticello. We're going to talk more about Monticello later, but it was Jefferson's plantation. They approached it, and Jefferson fled in a moment that damaged his reputation and haunted him for years at the power of this government that he had just written a document to rebel against. But after this move, Jefferson recovered politically. After the war, he served as the U.S.'s Minister to France, replacing Benjamin Franklin. And I know we see the Founding Fathers as just a bunch of old guys making decisions, but Thomas Jefferson was actually 30 years younger than Franklin. So him serving as the U.S. Minister to France was kind of a transfer of the torch, because Benjamin Franklin was a very important man in American history as well. Jefferson loved France. He loved their culture, he loved the food, and he loved their political ideas. It was a great opportunity for him. While there, he brought an enslaved cook, that was his slave, by the way, named James Hemings. Remember that name, Hemings, it'll come back later. Who trained in French cuisine. Together they worked and adapted to make a dish of pasta mixed with cheese that would later become what we know today as mac and cheese. This is one of my favorite presidential facts of all time, that Thomas Jefferson pretty much brought mac and cheese to America, because it's one of the most shocking pieces of his legacy. But while Jefferson was in France, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. There was something happening at the time called the French Revolution. The French Revolution was the common man fighting against the government that they felt was unfair to them. The hierarchy, the 2% ruling the 98%. The French Revolution is fascinating. Jefferson, witnessing this, opened his eyes to something. When the government has absolute power, when people are on the streets starving while the 2% are eating like kings and queens with no problems in the world, that's when the common man rises up and fights against the elite. Thomas Jefferson did not want that to happen. And witnessing what would later become the French Revolution, Jefferson's mind was set that he did not want America to fall into this category. Government needs to feel approachable and trustworthy enough to fight for the people without being truly above them. And this would shape Jefferson's idea of a lower presidential power that he would enforce later in his life. While George Washington himself might not have had an Instagram page, Presidents Unplugged does. If you want to see some presidential content and overall updates on the show, come to the Instagram at presidents_unplugged. See you there. But he's not the president yet. When Thomas Jefferson returned to the United States, George Washington appointed him as his Secretary of State, which placed him directly across the cabinet table from Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of War, great singer. Oh wait, that's the musical. The two men disagreed on literally everything. They disagreed on the national bank. They disagreed on federal power. They disagreed on foreign alliances. While Alexander Hamilton was a fan of doing stuff with the British, Jefferson was like, no, we just left them. Let's go to the French. He was a little bit cushy with the French, as we know. The two men were absolute rivals, and their clashes helped shape what was really America's first political divide. Jefferson eventually teamed up with James Madison to form the Democratic-Republican Party. Democrat, Republican, in the same sentence. Yeah, they're really not too similar to today's Democrat or Republican Party, but it was one of the first real political parties other than the Federalists, which would later shape into our modern political parties. Here's the issue. They made this Democratic-Republican Party as opposition to Hamilton's Federalist Party. And this was the beginning of organized political parties in America. But what George Washington said in his farewell address that I mentioned in The Man, the Myth, the Legend is he warned against political parties. He told Americans the downright truth when he said, if you identify with your party more than you identify that you're an American, that's when our country becomes divided. We are the United States of America, not the divided states of America. This is important. And Jefferson and Hamilton, just like that, before Washington's term was even over, they already didn't listen. Then came the election of 1796. John Adams won the presidency, but guess who came in second? Thomas Jefferson. Now today we know the presidents as both having their vice presidents picked out at the Republican or Democratic National Convention. Okay, that works. Back in the day, before the 12th Amendment, where vice presidents were clearly picked by the presidential candidates, the person who came in second place in the election would become the vice president. Can you see how that might become a problem? It's maybe like they don't agree on anything. They're not going to get anything done. And that's kind of what happened. While Adams was president, while Thomas Jefferson mostly kept his mouth shut, sometimes he would tell people to not make deals with Adams that would lean more Federalist. So this system was a little bit wrong, and I'm glad the 12th Amendment fixed it so that now we have the Democratic president and their vice president working together, and the Republican president and the Republican vice president working together. But then Jefferson was back. The election of 1800, I just got out of a month talking about elections, the most consequential, important elections in American history. I was very close to talking about it. It was an insane election in American history, and it really changed everything because it was one of the closest, most contentious elections, and eventually it had to be broken in a tie in the House of Representatives, but in the end, Jefferson won, marking the first peaceful transfer of power between rival parties, from the Federalists transitioning to the Democratic Republicans. Something is extraordinary about this, especially in a young nation. We peacefully transferred from one party to the other, and we didn't break apart. We didn't fall apart. We stuck together, and we fought through, which is something that we can all appreciate in modern politics. Thomas Jefferson, when he became president, really did revert a lot of Federalist decisions pretty soon after he got in there. He drastically reduced the size of government, he cut taxes, and he opposed centralized federal power, pushing authority back towards the states and lowering his own power. Oh, so humbling. Oh, what are you doing, Jefferson? Oh, don't buy the Louisiana Purchase. Talk about contradictions. What did we talk about earlier that Jefferson didn't want to happen? The leader of the nation to gain too much power. They almost seem like a king or a monarch. It's not good. But Jefferson, without Congress's approval, Thomas Jefferson bought 530 million acres of land from his good buddy France. For how much money? $15 million, which, is just pocket change. Americans were kind of confused what to think about this. Even though, we might have just doubled the size of our nation. Why was Jefferson allowed to do this without Congress's approval? It was kind of like a do now, ask for forgiveness later kind of thing, and it was very questionable. But in the end, I will give him the benefit of the doubt. Buying for less than $1 an acre is a pretty big steal. So we're glad that Thomas Jefferson and his buddy France were as close as they are, because we got to steal. And in the end, we did double the size of our nation. So it is a very important event in American history, even though it was full of contradiction. His second term was also pretty all right until the Embargo Act of 1807. Not going to go really too deep into it. An embargo is a country refusing to trade with another country because of war times or affiliations that don't agree. So Jefferson embargoed literally everything. It was, to put it simply, a disaster. Our economy tanked for the worse, and Jefferson did not look too good as he was leaving the office. So, good thing, Louisiana Purchase, questionable, but in the end, a good thing. And then a trade act that tanked our economy. Jefferson had kind of a half-and-half record. But here is the biggest contradiction of them all. I would love a count of how many times I've used that word this episode, because it's a lot. One of the most known things about Jefferson were the people that he enslaved at Monticello. What in the world is Monticello? Go in your mom's change purse and pull out a nickel. Who's on the front of that nickel? Thomas Jefferson, baby. Flip over the coin. That building? What's that, the White House? No. That building is Monticello. Monticello was Thomas Jefferson's plantation built almost entirely by his slaves. Jefferson didn't have just 3 or 4 slaves. Not 10, not 20. 600 throughout his entire life. That is almost double the amount of slaves that the president with the second most amount of slaves was. Who was that? Oh, not George Washington. I liked him. Yeah, Jefferson had 600 slaves. And he also made a little decision that a little controversial, okay? You remember Hemmings? The guy that went with Jefferson to France? Well, he had a sister named Sally Hemings. Jefferson had a child with her. Over the last 100 years with DNA testing, we have figured out this with pretty much full certainty. And let's just say it wasn't just one child. Thomas Jefferson made some bad decisions. He made a lot of these decisions involving his slaves, and a man that wrote in the Declaration of Independence when he was 26 the line that all men are created equal. The things he said didn't agree with the things that he did. That's the definition of contradiction, and why I've said it about 534 times in this episode. Thomas Jefferson made some bad decisions. But can I end this episode off in a positive and a really cool fact that you need to know about Jefferson? He died. Awesome. I thought he was still living. Thomas Jefferson died in 1826. On July 4th, 1826. Exactly 50 years to the day after the Declaration of Independence that he wrote almost entirely was adopted. Now, if he just died on this date, applause, great fact. But there's more. His former rival that he eventually, after their political careers kind of died down, began writing notes to, and they became best friends, John Adams, also died on July 4th, 1826. They died on the same day? On the anniversary of the independence of our nation. That's pretty insane. But some other things happened on July 4th. And if you want to learn more about those things that happened on that day, you can go to the episode Fireworks, Freedom, and Founding Fathers, a July 4th special. I think you'll enjoy it. But now let's finish on Jefferson for a second. How should we think of Jefferson today? Jefferson was a brilliant man. He had a great vision for our nation. But he was also deeply flawed. He expanded the nation tremendously, doubling it in size. He fought for liberty, and he authored the Declaration of Independence. But he also participated in and benefited from one of the greatest injustices in American history, after writing the statement, "All men are created equal." Understanding Jefferson means understanding both sides. The man who shaped Americans' ideals, the man who failed to live up to them. Just because of the flaws in his life, we should not just forget Thomas Jefferson in the American story. He was extremely important in the founding of our nation. And behind George Washington, he really is one of the main reasons that we are a nation as we are today. Very important. And we need to understand that Thomas Jefferson lived in a time with different ideals, different expectations, and a much different, very young, but blossoming nation. His story reminds us that the founding fathers and the founders of our country were not perfect. They were human. And it's our responsibility to study their successes and their failures to fully understand their impact on the nation, so we can understand the country that they built and how we can live their legacies out today. And that is why Thomas Jefferson is so important. Tune in next Friday as we talk about Woodrow Wilson, the most racist president in American history. Whoa, Ty. Don't start it off with that. Tell them about how he led us into World War I, gave women voting rights, and expanded the power of our nation. But he was also pretty racist. Learn about that and much more next week on Presidents Unplugged. I'm Ty Svensson, and I'll see you soon. God bless. We need to make an executive decision now. The executive decision to follow Presidents Unplugged on Apple Podcasts or Spotify today to be notified weekly that your favorite presidential podcast has released new content. Now, let's get back to the show.